thanks to all the journos who are joining us. So just to say, this is an MJA hosted briefing with our friends at Bupa. We've been asked to host this for them to connect with you, the journalists, about their new genetic screening program. The MJA isn't part of this. We're not backing it. We're not approving it, etc. We're just here to convene you all together and give you the chance to hear more from Bupa about this and ask your questions. So just to introduce our panel, first of all, who we're going to hear from first, we've got Dr. Rishi Patel, who's the head of the Genomics program at Bupa. We've also got Sarah Melia, who's the general manager for Bupa Health Services, and Nicola Green, who's the Bupa insurance lead for this work as well. So we'll hear from all three of those and take your questions at the end. So I think if I can hand over to our Bupa guests to kick us off. We are recording this call, by the way, for those who might need a copy or a transcript later, but do get in touch with us, and we'll be posting a video of this on the MJA website as well. So I think that's enough from me. So I'll hand over to our colleagues at Bupa. I think, Rishi, were you going to start us?
I think I'm going to start, actually, Sean.
Sorry.
That's fine. So hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today. Really pleased to be talking to you early on Monday morning. So welcome to the launch of our Bupa's Genomics Interventions Programme here in the UK. So we're going to talk to you about what we're doing to include genomic health testing throughout our customers' journeys. It's really important to us and really exciting in service of our purpose, which, as many of you will know, is to help people live longer, healthier and happier lives. So you're going to hear from me. I'm the general manager for our health services business. So I look after our clinics, hospital and our digital services in the UK. You're also going to hear from Dr. Rishi Patel, who's our head of clinical transformation for Bupa UK, and Nicola Green, who is our commercial director. So just a little bit of background for you, which I'm sure many of you will already know. So Bupa is the UK's leading health insurer. We also provide health and dental cover to over 3.8 million people. But in addition, we offer dental care at around 400 centres in the UK. We have over 120 care homes and villages and 70 health clinics, as well as the Cromwell Hospital in London. And we're providing care across the UK for insured customers, self-pay and international patients. So it's obviously a fast-paced, ever-changing world, and innovation is at the core of everything we do. So we're aiming to try and provide our customers, patients and residents with treatments and services that we hope are cutting edge, whether they're using digital tools, green technology, the latest in surgical robotics, or indeed, as we're here to talk about today, genomic health. So we're really hoping to increase, or we will be increasing our focus on prevention, helping people make lifestyle interventions that will help them live well for longer. And genomics is one of the ways in which we're innovating and looking to do that. So we're going to be the first major private healthcare provider to provide whole genome sequencing to our customers. It's called My Genomic Health, and the pilot will map the whole genome. So our pilot is going to offer more than 3,500 customers access to their genetic risk profile. And this means that we can help the customers identify their risk of disease across more than 36 conditions, including 10 cancers. So our aim is to provide participants in the pilot with personalised recommendations and tailored health plans, which will be aimed at helping people prevent illness and also promoting early detection of diseases. And those found to be at high genetic risk of developing a disease will have access to personalised recommendations and tailored health plans, which will promote early detection of disease, but also help them to prevent illness. Most importantly, the test will only report on genes where preventative action can be taken. So this initiative really represents a significant shift in healthcare delivery, focusing on prevention and early intervention, which is a bit of a shift away from just focusing on treatment. And that's why really we're going to be integrating genomic sequencing across a number of our existing and trusted services and some of the customer care pathways that we offer. So we're also going to be running a polygenic risk scoring pilot, otherwise known as PRS pilot, and this will be called Health Insights. And we plan to run that pilot for over 300 customers, with the aim of this being available as an optional add-on to one of our well-known Bupa health assessments. And that would be for women over 40 and men over 45. And we're going to be doing that early 2025. And that test, again, will assess the risk of 4 different conditions, including breast cancer, prostate cancer, type 2 diabetes, and also cardiovascular disease. So it's a really exciting time for us in our journey to evolve healthcare across the UK. We're exploring new innovative techniques to help our customers understand their health further and get a deeper than ever before knowledge, and hopefully give people personalised health information that they will use to manage their own wellness in a way that's tailored to them. But I'm going to hand over now to Dr. Rishi Patel, and he's going to talk in a little bit more detail about the pilot. So over to you, Rishi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sarah. Good morning, everybody. It's really great to meet you all virtually, and a big thank you for your time this morning. I'm Rishi Patel, Head of Clinical Transformation at Bupa. My background is as a medical doctor trained in public health, and it's my pleasure to spend the next sort of 10 minutes or so giving you an overview of the My Genomic Health pilot, as well as touching on some of the other genomic health offerings that we currently have at Bupa that Sarah alluded to. If we go to the next slide, please. Before getting into the detail of the pilot, I think it's really important to set the scene a little bit and explain, I guess, why we're interested in genomics, and explain exactly what role we think it has to play in the current and future healthcare landscape. The human genome is essentially our genetic blueprint, our complete set of DNA, and can be thought of as the instruction manual that makes each of us unique. Even though the vast majority of our DNA, around sort of 99.8%, is the same as other human beings, it's that 0.2% variation that really makes us unique as individuals. And the reason we're interested in studying genes and the human genome is because it plays a really important role in our health, both in terms of prevention of ill health, as Sarah mentioned, but also diagnosis and treatment of disease. To date, most of the application of genomic testing has been in the diagnosis and treatment of disease space, and personalization of treatments based on genomic testing results has become increasingly routine in clinical practice. For example, now, if you're diagnosed with certain cancer types, genomic testing will generally be performed to determine what the most appropriate treatment is for you as an individual. There might be chemotherapy, radiotherapy, or surgery. And this personalization essentially leads to less side effects and a better clinical outcome for that individual, which is great all round. However, it's also well established that genetic predisposition to certain conditions can play a major role in individuals being at risk of developing a wide range of diseases. The challenge at the moment is that currently this predisposition is often invisible. In fact, often individuals only become aware of this predisposition after a diagnosis is made, which is somewhat paradoxical. For all common diseases, genetics is a major risk factor, and in some cases, in fact, it's the most important risk factor. And we currently try to collect some of this information using proxies, such as family history or ethnicity clinically, but generally this is quite incomplete. So having the ability to be able to specifically test for genetic predispositions really offers us the opportunity to make those invisible risks visible to people, So they're really empowered with that information and can take appropriate action with the support of their clinicians to manage this risk profile. And as Sarah alluded to, if we're able to do this, it would really mean we're able to shift from a reactive to proactive model of care and focus on preventing ill health before it occurs. Next slide, please. And now, significant advances in preventative genomic testing really have unlocked the ability for us to predict disease and personalised care. And there are now several different types of preventative genomic tests that allow us to do exactly this. No one test is better than the others. The use cases will differ depending on the specific context and the type of information you're trying to provide to an individual. And for example, targeted or single gene testing on the left-hand side of the slide really has been the mainstay of predictive genetic testing to date. It's extremely useful to identify the presence of rarer genetic variants in individuals with really strong family histories of certain diseases such as cancer. A well-known example would be testing for BRCA variants in individuals with strong family histories of breast or ovarian cancer. However, because thankfully these variants are rare, generally being present in less than sort of 1% of the population, these types of targeted gene tests do not offer, a large number of individuals predictive information. And as science has evolved over the past few years, broader types of preventative genomic tests have now been developed, such as polygenic risk scores, which provide the ability to offer risk information around a greater number of common conditions to a larger proportion of individuals. And further still, on the right-hand side of the slide, the capability to now offer whole genome sequence testing really provides the ability to offer incredibly comprehensive risk information on both rare and common conditions, as well as other extremely useful health insights. Go to the next slide, please. So looking at whole genome sequence in particular, this is a process that looks at the entire genome. Therefore, one of the key opportunities of this type of testing is the breadth of information it can provide. So this includes information related to an individual's risk of developing a wide range of both rare and common conditions, utilizing both single gene testing and polygenic risk scores, which we discussed earlier. Also information about individual response to medications. This is called pharmacogenomics. Information about a wider variety of personal traits, for example, personalized response to exercise or nutrition. And also information related to carrier genes. So these are genes that do not generally impact you as an individual, but may impact future offspring. And because of this potential breadth, although you are looking at the whole genome, you can choose exactly what information to report. It's a bit like taking a traditional blood test from an individual and then being able to choose exactly what to provide information about. So, you could provide information about an individual's full blood count, kidney function, liver function in that blood testing example. And in that vein, as part of the My Genomic Health pilot, we have chosen to offer whole genome sequence testing, but focus on actionable conditions. So these are those conditions that have preventative or therapeutic measures available, which crucially means individuals can take steps to reduce their risk of developing them. It's also really important to remember that all types of predictive genetic testing, including whole genome sequencing, do not definitively predict that a condition will occur. It's all about identifying this high risk predisposition that would likely have otherwise been invisible to that individual. The idea being that once you're empowered with this information, even though you can't change your genetic makeup, you can take proactive steps to prevent ill health, which may include steps such as engaging in more frequent screening, lifestyle changes, more frequent self-examination, and even being more aware of symptoms to look out for, which can lead to early detection, which we know leads to better outcomes. Next slide, please. Therefore, we're really excited to learn more from the My Genomic Health pilot, which we're launching, which will offer whole genome sequencing focused on prevention and identifying high risk of actionable conditions to around 3,700 Bupa UK customers. The pilot was soft launched earlier this year and is due to last approximately 2 years. And as part of the pilot, individuals aged over 18 voluntarily opt in to participate. And once they've provided full informed consent, they have a blood sample taken at a Bupa Health Centre, which is then sent to the laboratory for sequencing. The individual's whole genome sequence results report, once back, is reviewed by our in-house clinical team, who review the report and provide personalized recommendations and a tailored health plan for that individual based on the results. These personalized recommendations also incorporate other relevant medical or family history for that individual as appropriate, and participants are offered a clinician appointment to discuss their results, with access to onward care pathways, if required, being provided as part of the pilot as well. Next slide, please. Based on the outputs of the My Genomic Health test results, a personalised health plan is created for each individual, which takes into account any risks identified. And one example of a genetic risk predisposition, which can be identified as part of the programme, is a condition called Lynch syndrome. This is a genetic condition affecting around 1 in 400 people, although it's thought that only around 5% of individuals are currently aware that they have it. If you have Lynch syndrome, it markedly increases your risk of developing bowel cancer. The lifetime risk can be as high as 80% in these individuals, and therefore it's recommended that individuals are under regular surveillance, having more frequent bowel cancer screening than the national screening programme, including with regular colonoscopies. Another example is a genetic condition called familial hypercholesterolemia. This affects around 1 in 250 people and impacts individuals' ability to reduce LDL, or so-called bad cholesterol, in the blood. And again, similar to Lynch syndrome, it's thought that less than sort of 8% of people are currently identified. This condition leads to individuals having extremely high levels of LDL cholesterol or bad cholesterol from birth. And sadly, the vast majority of people who have this condition only find out about it when they have had a heart attack at an early age, as people with this condition have around a 50% chance of having a heart attack by the age of 50. However, if detected early, the treatment needed is extremely simple and cheap, taking a medication to reduce their cholesterol levels, such as a statin. Therefore, having access to this sort of information really can help people remain well and live longer. It's also important to note in both of these examples, so the Lynch syndrome and the familial hypercholesterolemia example, the NHS have pathways and programs to actively try and proactively find individuals with these conditions and offer them more enhanced screening or treatment interventions to prevent them from becoming unwell. In fact, in the case of Lynch syndrome, this was the world's first move announced by the NHS earlier this year. As well as the genetic risk information for conditions being identified, pharmacogenomic results from the My Genomic Health test can really aid personalised prescribing decisions. So knowing how you as an individual respond to certain medications can reduce the risk of suffering side effects and increase adherence to taking medication, which we know is a huge problem in the healthcare ecosystem and leads to huge amounts of waste. As a clinician, I'm aware of how helpful this sort of information could be when choosing which medications to prescribe for an individual. And data suggests that the vast majority of individuals, close to 100% in fact, will have a pharmacogenomic variant identified if tested. And it's bringing this all together. It's really these personalized health plans incorporating all of these different outputs from the results, which offer huge potential in helping to shift to a more proactive, preventative care model in line with the ambitions and direction of travel of both the NHS and UK government. By empowering individuals with this information, they may be more motivated to make lifestyle changes and can be supported by interventions such as targeted screening or earlier use of more effective therapies to keep individuals healthier for longer. Next slide, please. And just to finish, I'd like to touch on a couple of the other genomics offerings that we're currently utilising in Bupa today. So as well as the My Genomic Health pilot, there are also several other examples of where we're using genomic testing at present. Later this year, as Sarah alluded to, we'll be launching a polygenic risk scoring pilot called Health Insights. Polygenic risk scoring is a technique that looks at multiple, often hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of tiny genetic variations across an individual's genome, and combines all of these together to provide a single overall summary score for an individual's genetic risk of developing various common conditions. Each of these tiny variations on its own has a negligible impact, but when they're all added up, they can lead to a significantly high risk of developing certain common conditions for a sizable number of individuals who would otherwise be unaware of this increased risk. Health Insights will offer around 300 individuals access to information about their genetic risk of developing 4 different common conditions, including breast cancer, prostate cancer, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease, with personalized recommendations given to individuals based on their results to help reduce their risk of developing them. Next slide, please. And finally, our UK insurance business is funding a growing number of genomic tests to personalise cancer treatment for individuals. These tests are available if their consultant recommends them as part of ongoing cancer treatments. There are a few examples shown on this slide, but for example, the Signatera test is used for customers with colorectal or bladder cancer, and this test indicates the likelihood of cancer returning and whether chemotherapy is required. The CERT test helps clinicians decide whether customers or individuals would benefit from immune checkpoint inhibitor treatments for multiple different cancers. And similarly, the other 2 tests also applicable in breast cancer and bladder cancer for similar use cases. These tests are hugely important as while treatments can be incredibly effective, the side effects can also be particularly unpleasant. So anything we can do to better guide personalized treatment to improve outcomes and reduce side effects is very, very welcome. I'll stop there and hand back over to Sean, and would be delighted to answer any follow-up questions you may have.
Thanks, Rishi. A really interesting presentation. As everyone on the call gets ready for their questions, I just wanted to ask for myself. So this is a pilot, but clearly it's the direction of travel for healthcare more broadly, both the NHS and private. So is it Bupa's intention to roll this out further to more customers at some point and to cover more conditions as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think as you said, part of the as you said, this is a pilot, so the key part is learning from this and understanding future applicability. So as you rightly say, it feels like the direction of travel in terms of this move to proactive preventative healthcare. So the key learnings from this will determine exactly how the sort of how the whole genome sequence testing and other genomics offerings are integrated into the future products and services that we provide.
We can open it up to people questions on the call if anyone wants to raise their hand, and we can dive in there. So I think we've got a question straight out the bat from Jane. Go ahead, Jane. You're on mute, Jane.
You're on mute, Jane, I think.
Sorry. I was really interested that you mentioned Lynch syndrome, because it's actually something I wrote about a couple of months ago, and I was quite shocked that I had never heard of it. And I know it's very common because a friend who had said, oh, I've got this, I've just got rubbish genes, actually then confirmed that she in fact has Lynch syndrome. But given the number of people that carry that mutation, for want of a better word, is there a danger that that suddenly discovering all of these patients or all of this at-risk group is going to put a lot of pressure on already sort of stretched NHS services?
Rishi, do you want to go with that one?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jane, for your question. I think it is really interesting because a lot of this, as we've talked about, is around risks that currently people sort of have, but are essentially invisible to them at the moment. And using the example of Lynch syndrome, at the moment, usually what happens is, sadly, an individual is diagnosed with bowel cancer at an early age, and as part of their sort of treatment, they are tested for genetic predisposition, and if they're identified to have Lynch syndrome, then their family members are also offered sort of genetic testing to see if they also carry these mutations. Now, I think the direction of travel is clearly if you have these risk predispositions identified for in the case of Lynch syndrome, what that means is you can essentially be put on enhanced surveillance and more frequent screening. And if you then do develop a bowel cancer, this can be detected at a much earlier stage. And then we know that the outcomes and the treatments are much better for both the individual, but also the healthcare system as a whole. And I think this is exactly why in February of this year, the NHS, essentially as a world first, also are proactively trying to identify individuals with Lynch syndrome so they can offer them these sort of enhanced screening programs. So I think there are benefits for both individuals, but clearly the healthcare system from early identification and treatment.
Of course. And presumably a number of those patients would go through the Bupa system anyway.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, if I can, you're doing this testing. These are obviously Bupa customers, but is there? I'm just interested in the sort of the anxiety this might create for people, and do they then troop off to their local NHS GP holding their Bupa test results, and then this is adding pressure onto an already pressured NHS service? There's a danger there, isn't there?
Yeah. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So as part of this, what's really important for us is providing that wraparound care, the wraparound support that you have from start to finish. So making sure that people really understand the process that you're going to go through, having whole genome sequence testing, understanding what that means, and therefore being really clear on what those next steps are for you. The anxiety that you talk about there, we have a really comprehensive communications plan and engagement plan with any potential customers, who then have the ability to see genetic counsellors as well, to talk about truly understanding exactly the information that they will receive, answering any questions that they may have, and as we've mentioned, being with them the whole step through. So going through the testing, having the reports coming through, post-counselling after the reports to truly understand them, and then any onward pathways that might be necessary. What we would say, if somebody is health anxious about it, they have the opportunity to not progress, because we would give them all of the information that they have to know if this is information that they want to have, and then understand how to use that information moving forward. So I suppose from Bupa's point of view, it wouldn't push into the NHS, because we provide that wraparound support from start ongoing through the pilot for the individuals that go through the testing.
Okay.
Actually, it might be useful for you to add a few comments just generally about that as well.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I think it's always really important to note that we do risk stratification, risk identification as part of routine clinical practice at the moment. So in areas such as cardiovascular disease or diabetes, tools like QRisk and QDiabetes are used in routine practice. I think you're completely right, Sean, in terms of trying to understand how individuals respond to this sort of risk information is absolutely key. And it's certainly an area that we need more data on. But I think reassuring the emerging data, the early data that we certainly have, suggests that actually, rather than creating lots of anxiety, people feel quite empowered with this information. So I know certainly in breast cancer, a few years ago, there was a study in the British Journal of Cancer in 2018, around sort of 800 women, and having these sorts of risk estimates didn't cause any emotional behavior harms, and actually, they felt more informed and empowered when provided this sort of information. So these are the sorts of learnings that I think will be really important to get and incorporate when designing sort of future health programs.
Okay, we've got a raised hand from Isla. I think. Go ahead, Isla.
Thanks, Sean. That's great, really interesting. Thank you, Bupa and Rishi. That was great. My question really is a bit more of a sort of a social question. How does this work with insurance? And particularly if you're talking about picking up people at quite a young age who might want to get a mortgage, or they might need life insurance. How is that going to affect that? And indeed, how would that affect their Bupa insurance payments? So you've got a client who's suddenly been found to have a high risk of breast cancer or prostate cancer. Is that going to affect their insurance with you to get this wraparound care that you've talked about?
Sarah, do you want me to pick that
go
up?
for it,
Yeah,
Nick.
right.
Yeah.
Okay, so Bupa Insurance are signed up to the Code on Genetic Testing and Insurance, and this is a voluntary voluntary code of practice which is between the government and the Association of British Medical Insurers, the ABI. And what that means, what we've signed up to is that we do not use genetic data. So we would not use genetic data from a premiums perspective, from a claiming perspective, or in fact for attracting acquisition, so for new people wanting to join Bupa. So that's standard part of the code of practice that we would not take into account anything genetic. So if from the results something is identified, you don't have to share that information. We would never ask for that information. That information would not be detailed within any systems that would have any impact on an individual from any of the aspects we talked about before. So there's a really clear code of practice in place from Bupa Insurance in respect of that.
Okay, and is that across? You said it's the code, but is that across all insurers as well, including life insurance, travel insurance, all of?
Yes, so within the UK, what we have detailed as again part of our comms is within the UK, that is the ruling across the ABI code of practice. However, it's really important for people to check local rules. If somebody was within the UK, then moved internationally, an individual would need to check the local rules in place for the area they're going to. So, but within the UK, we adhere to the code of practice for insurance.
There's one very specific exception to that rule, which is for life insurance policies over £500,000, I think it is, with Huntington's disease specifically. That is not tested for as part of the My Genetic Health pilot.
Yeah, so we wouldn't test for that specific condition.
Thanks very much, Isla. I wanted to just ask a question myself again, and anybody on the call, if wants to ask a question, please do raise your hand, and I'll come to you. But just slightly following on from Isla's question about the insurance and the use of information, when these tests are being done in the lab, who is doing that testing? Does Bupa control the data all the way through that? And I think you mentioned at the beginning this is whole genome sequencing. So although you'll only report on 36, is there, if I did this test, is there information on my entire genome that somebody else has somewhere in a file that isn't communicated to me? If that question makes sense?
Rishi, that might be good for you to answer that one, and I can always jump in if not.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So Bupa are overseeing the end-to-end pathway as part of this, from essentially provision of information, informed consent, all the way to results delivery. We have a third party who we're working with in terms of provision of the actual sort of laboratory sequencing. So essentially the sequence is, you can think about the sequence essentially being a very large data file, so uninterpretable to the human eye, essentially a series of letters, and this comes back to, I think, the really important point around actionability and choosing what information to provide back. So to answer your question very directly, no, there is not information out there about you as an individual that isn't being reported to you that other people have access to. Essentially, the raw sequence data file, we are pulling the actionable information from that and reporting on everything that we've pulled. So there's no other sort of interpretable information out there. As you'd expect, Bupa comply with all data processing laws as appropriate. The data is held very securely in sort of secure cloud environments, etc. And that's the way the sort of the process works on that side.
Okay, we've got a question from Dawn Connolly from the Pharmaceutical Journal. Go ahead, Dawn.
Yeah, hi there. I was interested in the pharmacogenomics testing. I just wondered if you could say a bit more about that in terms of maybe how many sort of potential drugs could be impacted by the genes that you're testing for, and also whether Bupa patients will be able to share that information with their NHS GP or pharmacist.
Definitely one for you, Rishi, again.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Dawn. I don't have the exact number off the top of my head in terms of the sort of the exact number, but I'm sure we could get that to you afterwards. But broadly, the pharmacogenomic variants are in different categories. So you might have, cardiovascular medications, for example, endocrine medication, for example, et cetera. And I think this is an area that I certainly, as a clinician, am particularly interested in, because as you rightly allude to, it can have, real impacts on that personalized prescribing. Absolutely, individuals, of course, if you're on medications, then it can be very, very helpful to sort of tailor medications appropriately. But even if you're not, and then you were to require a medication in the future, then again, it can inform those prescribing decisions. Clearly, the challenge is integrating this fully into the healthcare system, and that's, I think, what comes next. But again, we know that certainly Genomics England and the NHS are leaders in this space, and also are thinking along these lines. We have already some really good examples of where pharmacogenomic information can really, really impact clinical prescribing and reduce unwanted side effects. One really good example is the case of gentamicin. So this is a commonly used antibiotic, particularly in newborns, actually, who are suspected to have sepsis. It's an excellent antibiotic, but one of the side effects is ototoxicity, so it can cause hearing loss. It's often difficult to know, or impossible to know, without pharmacogenomic testing, which individuals would be impacted by this hearing loss. But there's recently actually been a NICE approved bedside test for testing for this pharmacogenomic variant, which would then identify, you'd know who to avoid prescribing this medication in. It's that sort of use case, that sort of example, which we would like to build on to really help reduce sort of unwanted side effects, and really try and move towards that system of embedding this in sort of routine clinical practice and impacting day-to-day prescribing decisions.
Did that answer your question, Dawn? I'm assuming so.
Yeah, I think so. I guess I'm thinking, if someone's having a pharmacogenomic test on their whole genome, that's something that will be valid for sort of the rest of their life. And will their GP or will the NHS sort of have that information when they're making future prescribing decisions? Is what?
Yeah. So at the moment, the test output, absolutely, the individual could take that to their NHS GP. I guess the future, what we'd try to get towards at some point is full integration into electronic medical records and things. But I think that's that'd be great once we get there.
Okay, thank you.
We've certainly got some of our internal people who've done the test so far who have had personal learning. So I was one of them. Took it to my GP and had a really helpful conversation around some of the medications used, and they found it really helpful as well, I think.
That's really interesting, Sarah. I was actually going to ask the three of you if you'd had the test done at all, and what you made of it and what you found out. I don't know if you're happy to share that information with us, but I'd be interested in the process that you went through.
Yeah, I've had the test, Rishi has, and I found it really insightful. There's definitely some things identified that have made me more aware, and I will take proactive decisions around how I manage my health in future, certainly, and I have already made some lifestyle changes, albeit small. There was nothing too dramatic in there for me, but there was definitely, I'm one of those people that needs those statins, but I already knew that, but had I not known that, it would have been a really helpful thing to be identified. And there was some pharmacogenic information that has been helpful for me as well. So personally, I found it. I also have a carrier gene, which I need to be aware of as well. So found it very helpful.
Yeah, and leading off of that, also very happy to share. So I also found it incredibly helpful. So my personal results essentially identified a higher than average risk for both prostate cancer and coronary artery disease. But I think those were both polygenic risk scores. And what that means for me is that, once essentially I'm eligible for prostate cancer PSA testing, I will definitely engage in that frequently. From a cardiovascular disease perspective, I'm very motivated to make these lifestyle changes and manage, be aware of my blood pressure, be aware of, my cholesterol levels, get those regular things, ensure that I'm sort of up to date with knowing all of those metrics, because I think part of this is about identifying these risks over a long period of time. So really making those day-to-day changes and engaging with those proactive health behaviors to reduce those risks. But it's hugely, I found it particularly helpful to know about those risks. And then one of the other things we know clinically is that actually being aware of signs and symptoms to look out for is particularly important. We know that people essentially, do tend to put off symptoms, ignore them. But, the hypothesis is that if you are aware that you're at high risk of developing a certain condition, A, you can know what symptoms to look out for, but B, if you develop one, hopefully you seek medical attention as soon as possible and get the appropriate investigations and diagnosis.
I think just to build on that as well, so my test is booked, so I haven't got my results as yet, but I think hopefully it just brings to life there when Sarah and Rishi talk about the impact having that knowledge has had, and it's different for everybody, but ultimately from my point of view, my role as customer, being a key strategic part of my role, it's understanding how we can support people to make those changes on the journey to drive better health outcomes for them, in whatever that looks like for them. So the more we're empowering people by giving them information to be able to make their health a priority, and ultimately that's what we want to achieve from the pilot.
Okay, I think Jane, you've got your hand up again.
Yeah, so just picking up on that, obviously the test is not going to say this issue is not a risk for you, but if something isn't flagged as a risk, is there a danger that you're going to have people that sort of say, oh, well, that didn't come up, I can do whatever I like? We've all heard of that sort of thing of, oh, well, my gran smoked 100, fags a day and didn't get lung cancer. Is there sort of counselling around that included in the sort of the package?
Okay. Rishi,
yeah, more than that. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think part of this, as you alluded to at the end there, is all about being really transparent and providing excellent information about what the test is and what it isn't. So we've talked about the importance of genetic risk for developing certain conditions. We know it's an important risk factor. It's not the only risk factor. So as you rightly say, environmental, lifestyle, behavior change, there's and increasingly whether the sort of social environment you live in, all of those are really important risk factors. I think we've never really before been able to measure the genetic risk component of that, of that sort of equation. So now that we've got that, or got the ability to do that, combining it with all of the other factors becomes increasingly important and a real opportunity. So it's absolutely to your point. It's not about, this risk wasn't identified, therefore you don't need to worry about it. Everyone has an average baseline risk of developing, everything essentially. So that's why, that wraparound care around really explaining what the test is, what it isn't, and then once your results come back, really contextualizing those results for you as an individual based on your medical history, your family history, and then all of the other wider risk factors becomes really, really important.
Yeah, thank you.
And can I just ask, Rishi, what's your thoughts about the future here? Because do you anticipate rolling out to more conditions, and do you see a future where almost the entirety of healthcare is based around this kind of thing, where we all troop off to our GP at the age of 18 or whatever, get a genetic test that covers everything, and private providers and insurers like Bupa, Viva and all the rest, you'll all be entering into some sort of price war over genetic testing, and almost our entire healthcare will be delivered using this as a framework. Is that science fiction, or do you see that becoming a reality?
I think the pace of change scientifically has certainly been incredible over the last 10 or 20 years. I think if we think that the first human genome was only sequenced back in 2003, took about 13 years and cost around $1 billion, and then if you fast forward 20 years later, and that price has sort of decreased about 1 millionfold in that time. So I think the pace of change has been massive. To answer your question around more and more conditions, I think yes, over time, but actually we need to be really careful scientifically. So we need to make sure that we have enough clinical certainty that the things we are testing for really are associated with the sort of the conditions that can be developed. So I think the pace of change will be determined by the sort of the progress in science and clinically. And again, it's it's a rapidly evolving area. So it may be that over time more and more conditions do get added, but always I think through that lens of actionability, which is absolutely crucial. I think in terms of the wider healthcare landscape, if you look at the UK have been a leader in this space for many years. So Genomics England, 100,000 Genomes Project, the Our Future Health study, and the recently announced Generation study. So this is looking at sequencing genomes of 100,000 newborns to identify risk of genetic conditions as well. So I think absolutely in terms of direction of travel, identifying risks of conditions developing before and then putting in place measures to reduce those risks are, I think absolutely will be the mainstay of medicine, healthcare as we move forward. Exactly how that plays out will probably obviously depend on scientific advances and clinical advances. But I think that alignment of that proactive, preventive future, that shift from sort of reactive to proactive, I think certainly from my point of view is the way it will play out.
Okay, we've got a question from Isla.
Yep, sorry, I'm back again. Sarah, this question for you. Right at the beginning, you mentioned that you were investigating 9 different conditions, and you guys mentioned the big 4. Have I missed the other 5, or could you explain what they are?
So the 4, I think, was in relation to the polygenic risk scoring. Yeah. Rishi, do you want to give an overview of the key for the whole genome sequencing?
Or just which other conditions are you?
Yeah, sure. So we could definitely provide you with a full list probably after this if helpful. But I think for the My Genomic Health pilot, so the whole genome sequence pilot, that's around 36 conditions, I believe, of which 10 are cancers. So we can provide you with the with the list. The Health Insights, which is the polygenic risk scoring pilot, that's those 4 conditions that Sarah mentioned. So the prostate cancer, breast cancer, type 2 diabetes, and cardiovascular disease.
I was just wondering if Alzheimer's was in there, or any forms of dementia.
So it's not, and the reason being is again around that sort of actionability point. Yeah. Now I know that if you ask different people, you sometimes get a different answer around Alzheimer's, different types of dementia. There is evidence to suggest that you can, certainly reducing some of the cardiovascular risk factors can reduce your risk of developing Alzheimer's. But we decided not to include that in this pilot in terms of around the definition of actionability. So yes, that Alzheimer's or different types of dementia aren't included as part of the pilot.
Maybe not yet, maybe in the future, potentially.
Possibly.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we'll have you back to discuss it when that's the case, Rishi. But I mean, there's a lot going on with dementia and drugs, isn't there? So you never know. We'll see.
Absolutely.
I don't know if anybody else has other questions to raise, but you've obviously told us about the 36 conditions. Can we get that full list? Can the journalists get the whole 36. If
Absolutely.
you can provide that, yeah, that'd be really good. So I don't see any more questions. Oh no, we've got one from Sarah just coming in. Go on, Sarah.
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, just wanted to know how are Bupa going to select the customers or members for the pilot?
Do you want to go with that?
Yeah. Okay. So far, since we started with our soft launch, we've been working with staff, so Bupa's staff, and we always want to lead by example with our own teams as well. And the view then will be for us to move into corporate clients. So we'll have conversations with our corporate partners with regards to employees, but also consumers as well. So we want to learn as much as we can during this pilot, and that will mean us testing and talking to different segments of customers so that we can truly understand the value that this delivers across the board for each different type of customer. So we will start with corporates, but we have a plan then to move very quickly across all of our customer segments within the UK insurance customer book.
Okay, thanks, Nicola. So it's not dependent on age, gender, or
only
any
over
existing.
Just over 18. Only 18, and that they have Bupa insurance as a policy. So again, we can be sure that we can provide all the onward care and support that an individual might need based on the results. But the only criteria there will be over 18 and that they're comfortable to proceed and give their informed consent.
Okay, so other than that, it's just random. It's not people with any pre-existing health problems. No. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, I think we've exhausted people's questions, unless there's any burning questions people want to raise their hands quickly. Nigel's popping in. See, you're all coming in with late questions. Go on, Nigel. Is he there?
I think you're on mute, Nigel.
Apologies, I've came late, so you may have covered this, but will you be giving some advice or conversations with family members who also may share these kind of genes and the risks associated with them?
Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure. So any onward testing for family members is not included as part of the pilot, but absolutely as part of the post-test results, discussions with a clinician. All of those sorts of implications would be discussed. It obviously varies depending on individual circumstances. So, age of individuals and, their family circumstances, et cetera. So I think, with all of the onward implications, that will be covered as part of the, the post-test results discussion, and then the appropriate recommendations, advice given as part of that.
Okay. Unless there's any more, I think we've come to a natural end, and I think we've covered quite a lot there already. If people have any extra questions, they can, of course, go to MHP and Bupa for those. Certainly don't come to me. I think we'll leave it there then. Thanks so much to our guests for this, and thank you to the journalists for attending. As I said, you should have all had the press release sent to you this morning. If you haven't, let us know and we'll get that to you. And if you need a recording of the briefing this morning, we can also get that to you so you can help with your notes, etc. Otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, and good luck with the rest of the day.
Thank you to you, Sean, as well, and we really appreciate you hosting today, and really appreciate everybody taking the time to join us this morning. Thanks so much.
No, it's my pleasure. We'll have you back to discuss the results of your pilot in 2 years.